It's well known that our appearance affects our mental health. The anti-aging industry has tried to capitalize on that for decades. Unfortunately, many of the anti-aging products out there simply fall short. This is why you should try Multi-Collagen. Multi-Collagen works to quickly restore youthfulness back into your skin. If you want to look and feel your best, grab your Multi-Collagen today. Get up to 51% off for the next 24 hours only by going to collageninspired.com or by visiting the link below. Hey, Inspired Tribe, my fellow freedom lovers, how's it going? It's Jean Nolan here. Thank you for joining us again today. As talks are ramping up about the monkeypox around the world, and as this topic is gaining steam and fear and worry are being projected onto the people, in America currently we're also seeing multiple deadly shootings around the country. A horrific thing that we've seen just right now in Texas with the elementary school shooting. Now it's very difficult for me to go into the details because I simply don't trust media whatsoever because of my personal experience with media in a very friendly artist kind of way. I'm an artist and songwriter. I simply don't trust media, and it's very difficult at this point to make an assessment as to what this exactly was. However, what we can see is, of course, as scheduled, as planned, a debate that is revolving around the Second Amendment and guns in America. Before we talk about all that, before we talk about some of the facts, and before we talk about the spiritual aspect of it all, I want to say one thing very, very clearly. Violence is never a feasible way. It's simply never the answer to anything. And we are horrified at the violence that we see every day in the world, especially against the most innocent, the children. If it's happening in a manner like it did in Texas, or if it's happening through abuse, through child trafficking, for child prostitution, for ritualistic abuse, all these things. And it is something that is so close to our hearts that we're in the background working on things to bring about healing in this area in any way, shape, or form we can. So we never want to minimize or in some way diminish the pain and the suffering that people are experiencing around the world, and at the worst, children are experiencing around the world. We want to talk a little bit today about the program around it all, because the truth of the matter is that every time after such a horrific event, and we simply do not know the circumstances, the background, we will never know these things unless they're being uncovered. We simply never know what these things always entail, why they happen, when they happen. A lot of it goes into play there, and I won't speculate. But I want to go into the facts a little bit, because we now hear, and this is going to get louder and louder over the following days and weeks, of course, repeal the Second Amendment, stop gun sales, ban guns, do all these things. And it's a very, very short-sighted argument. And the truth is that the people that are screaming the loudest, that want to take guns away from people, are oftentimes the same people who fight the hardest to have or keep the right to kill unborn children, or even children after they're born. It's a very interesting cognitive dissonance that is happening in these people. But let me go into the facts a little bit. I want to talk about the facts. I want to talk about the spiritual aspect, and maybe come to a conclusion, or at least to opening more doors about this whole debate. So let me tell you something about guns in America. And this, granted, these stats are a few years old, but they haven't changed very much. This is a very comprehensive little statistic here. And they're 30,000 gun-related deaths per year by firearms in the United States. That's not disputed. This number, of course, varies from year to year. The U.S. population, when this stat was created, was roughly 324 million, and that was in 2016. 324 million people in America. So that's 0.0092% of the population that die from gun-related actions each year. 0.009. Statistically speaking, that's insignificant, but no life is ever insignificant. 65% of those deaths are by suicide. Okay, so we can put those aside. Those are never going to be prevented by stricter laws. 15% are by law enforcement in the line of duty. 17% are through criminal activity, gang and drug-related, or mentally ill persons. That's better known as gun violence. And 3% are accidental discharge deaths. So basically, what we know as gun violence then boils down to 5,100 deaths per year, of which 9.4% are happening in Chicago, 6.7% in Baltimore, 6.5% in Detroit, and 2.3% in DC, which means 25% of all these 5,100 deaths occur in 4 cities, which have some of the strictest gun laws in the country. This leaves about 3,825 gun deaths for the entire nation. Is that horrible? Yes, it is horrible. But again, if you look at this statistically, it is really minimal. And that's something we need to understand. We need to put things into perspective. This is a little bit about the real and true stats. Again, this is a few years old, but they haven't changed significantly now. Why do we have the Second Amendment in America? When the Constitution was written and when the thought processes were created and when the founding fathers were thinking about all these things and writing back and forth to each other and you know, the Federalist Papers are very eye-opening for this process. But the Second Amendment was put in the Constitution not for hunting or not even for self-defense purposes on a day-to-day basis. The Second Amendment was put in the Constitution specifically to have a well-regulated militia, a well-armed, regulated militia. So the point was, because of all the experience that generations of people had in Europe, because of the overbearing monarchies and governments, because of the horrific things that have happened, people here wanted to create a balance of power. And so the people were armed or gave themselves the right to be armed, which is a natural right anyways, so they could, as a last stand, defend themselves against a tyrannical government. Over the last 2.5 years, we have seen many tyrannical measures around the world, so this is not far-fetched whatsoever, and basically it means it creates this balance of power. So when the population is armed, it is very unlikely that the government, the state itself, is going to become too overbearing, too aggressive, and too controlling, because they know there is checks and balances. That is the biggest reason why there is a Second Amendment and the right for gun ownership. Now, if you want to take this away from people, then there's really just one reason, and it's unfortunately not what they're talking about, which is shootings, which is those 3,825 gun deaths preventable. Of course, everything can be prevented per year. It's really because that is the last stand, and when the guns are given up, then there's no more balance of power in any way, shape, or form, and governments can move to this overbearing, super controlling, centralized form that they've been. That's the bureaucrats' wet dreams, and that's the globalists' wet dream. In the day and age that we live today, if we truly disarm the population, then this would only be able to happen if at the same time governments would disarm themselves as well. But let me ask you something. If you believe gun laws will change anything, I believe you have a very limited understanding of what laws really are. Laws don't prevent crime. Laws create crime. The more man-made laws you have, the more crimes you've created. And we now have such a plethora of laws, regulations, stipulations, rules, and whatnot, that people are breaking the law constantly, not even knowing it. So all sorts of crimes are created. Interestingly, in the United States, the counties that are the best armed or well armed, where sheriffs are coming out talking to their people and saying, hey, listen, be sure to be armed, have a gun in your household, make sure everybody knows how to use it, be responsible. But it also sends a message to criminals knowing this county is armed, and these are the counties that see very, very little or no crime whatsoever, very, very little at least. And so the dynamics are really not what they're being portrayed in media. And media, of course, drives this, and politicians drive this solely on an emotional level. And interestingly enough, ironically, of course, those politicians that are so anti-2A, the Second Amendment, and the celebrities, well, look at their bodyguards. They're usually all armed. What they're saying again is, don't do as I do as I say. And they're not following their own rules. And it is really about control solely. Now, what is the future of our planet, and will we always have guns? I don't believe so. I don't believe we will always have the necessity for weapons on this planet, other than maybe for hunting purposes. I truly believe there is a future where our consciousness will evolve and develop wide and far enough that killing each other, harming each other with weapons simply won't be on our minds. However, we are not at this point yet. And I believe if you are in your heart space, I believe if you are centered, I believe if you're balanced, then violence really doesn't play a great role in your life whatsoever. It sure doesn't in mine. I'm the most peaceful and relaxed person you could encounter. I am about harmony. I'm about meditating balance and creating all of these beautiful things. At the same time, I don't bury my head in the sand, and I see what is happening in the world today. I see that we're in this huge transformational time, and I also see that the necessity at this time for an armed population is bigger than ever, and this will continue to create a balance of power. Why would you want? Now let me ask you this. Why would you want to take a right away from you, from yourself, but give it to somebody else, namely the government, which is the entity all around the world that has committed the worst atrocities and crimes in all of history? Everywhere you look, governments are the biggest killers. Governments are the biggest criminals of them all. I mean, this is just statistics. The entities that have killed the most people have always been governments. Now, we're also talking about all the other preventable deaths. We have 200,000 plus preventable medical errors that lead to deaths every year in this country. 200,000 deaths, over 700,000 heart attacks. Of course, other medical procedures in the recent past and the present have completely unknown long-term effects, and we're just beginning to see what we anticipated, unfortunately. But there's so much going on, and the truth here is, and this is the conclusion a little bit of this topic today, is that if you really look at what the agenda here is bringing power through such things as the World Health Organization Pandemic Treaty, which we've talked about recently, which these new amendments that are being voted on or have been voted on grant the World Health Organization extraordinary powers over the member states. So this is an international body that no one ever voted for or on, that has extensive powers over the procedures in a country, that can, through these amendments, dictate what this country has to do or cannot do, lockdowns, medical procedures, whatnot. So you have this body, and then you have a population that is heavily armed here in the United States that, I believe that neither sheriffs nor the American military would ever go against their own people and take away their guns. But if that is an international body, an international army, a UN army, things like that begin to happen or develop in this country, we have a whole different situation. However, I live in the south of the United States. There is a very peaceful, loving, harmonious, friendly culture here, and everybody's armed. Most everybody's armed, the vast majority. My observation, my feeling, my understanding is people are not ever going to give that up, and to try to break this, one of the hallmarks of this nation, I think is going to prove to be very, very, very difficult or even impossible. And I would suggest that we continue to work on our spiritual evolution, that we continue to work on our communities, that we continue to work on creating better living conditions for mental health, for spiritual health, for physical health, because this is the real issue at hand here. We have created a sick, upside-down society. We are disconnected from the Creator. We're disconnected from nature. We are depressed. We're over-medicated, and we're undereducated. And all of these things really lead to violence in many ways. And violence doesn't just express itself through guns. However, beginning to take away tools and thinking you will fix the underlying problems is literally what society has been doing for the longest time, and it's only getting worse. So leave the Second Amendment alone. Let's all focus on how we can heal, on how we can bring about more harmony, more love, more peace, and see how this will shift things around, and see how this will truly, for the long haul, transform this beautiful world that we're living in. I want to thank you. I appreciate your comments. We appreciate everything that you share with us. We appreciate you liking and sharing and all these beautiful things. And we appreciate the complexity of the world that we currently live in. Our minds need to be constantly challenged because we're being constantly bombarded with programming. And so I challenge you, whichever side on this debate you're on, be on the side of full responsibility, personal responsibility, and be on the side of openness, of love, of friendship, of kindness, and see that new laws or greater restrictions will never bring about a shift in consciousness. It is only our individual evolution that can create new ways, new images, a new kind of living together. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you. We love you. And we'll be back with you very, very soon.